Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. And I, of course, am Brigid Burke. And we're starting out today. As you can see, there's a lot of light on in this room. Normally, I've talked about how I only like natural light in the room. But today is very rainy out, and I want to make sure that there's enough light that you can see me. And also, because there's something I probably want to read to you this morning, I want to make sure that I have enough light to actually see it, because my vision is I do have readers that I use, although a lot of times I just find myself kind of doing this kind of thing. I probably should go out and get a new pair of glasses, but because the prescription I had for reading for a long time ago is no longer, I think it was actually went bad within the first month. Like, I think a month afterwards I was supposed to use it for certain things, and if I wore my glasses I literally couldn't see anything. So I was like, okay, this is not very good. They especially wanted me to wear it while driving, and I thought, I guess I'm technically farsighted, so when I look out, if I wore glasses and the glasses that I had, I couldn't see what was in front of me. So if somebody was walking in front of my car, it wasn't until I was right on top of them that I could actually see that they were there. So I was like, yeah, no, this is not a good idea. So anyway, I just find the main thing for me is I need a lot of light. So we have a lot of light. And good morning. Thank you for joining me. So we have this. So this morning, this is a rather interesting day for me. I have several calls, and I'm meeting with somebody later today with a friend of mine. Actually, she used to be a student of mine years ago, who's back in the neighborhood, and she's now lives in Washington, and she's going to come back and visit. And she's visiting in the area, so she's asked me to meet with her later today. Yesterday was a rather interesting day. I got into a mini altercation with the pastor of the church next door, who is a person who when he first got here, and again, I don't go to the church, but I do know that he is, when he first got here, he was actually pretty nice. They own the property next to mine, so he had cleaned it up, and he had talked to me about things he was doing and things he was changing that people were mad at him for, and it's different. But although the stuff that they were mad at him for was stuff I was glad that he was doing, so it was all good. And he used to be very kind of community oriented and stuff like that. Well, he has developed, and I understand this seems to be an epidemic at this church with pastors, is that they develop this kind of get off my lawn attitude. So then it's like they hate everybody and don't want anybody on their property. Well, they've got my road closed at the other end, and there's big machine, you literally can't walk anywhere. And he's had all of his, parking lots resurfaced, which is hilarious because nobody's allowed to park in them. But he had them all resurfaced, and you can walk on those. You just can't drive on it while it's curing. And he's walking back and forth on it. And I had to cut through there because I was meeting up with my sister who was picking me up. And he kind of was like, could you not walk on that? And I looked at him, and I'm not even going to tell you what I said to him, but I kind of went off and on like, he said, okay to walk here. He's like, I was just not in the mood. Because I had a couple things set me off before I walked out the door. And my sister was laughing at me because she's like, he didn't expect to encounter the dark feminine down his street. Because if anybody watches Katonia podcast, you know that it's the podcast of the dark feminine. He's like, yeah. But I just, he looked at me and he kind of put his head down after that. He was kind of grumbling to himself. But I'm like, yeah, don't start with me. I was just not in the mood. But and I don't care. I'm not the type of person who enjoys making bad blood with the people around me, but I'm also not gonna, there is kind of a thing that people will do, and it does depend on the situation, whether or not it's worth asserting yourself in a situation or whether it's worth just letting it go. But I was just like, I was just annoyed with him because it's like, you can literally see there's nowhere for anybody on this end of the street to go, and you're going to start getting this way about, literally it was ridiculous. But he does this to everybody, so it's not really personal. But I was just, but I just stared him. I just stare him down because I'm just like, just don't F with me. I can start complaining about what you've now done to the property next door, which is making a problem for my, I could get into that, but I haven't thus far. So anyway, that was a point of annoyance yesterday. But today should be a much nicer day. I'm also going for something today called Rahani healing. I'd not heard of it before. I had a friend of mine went and had it done and told me about it. And the reason I'm having it is because this is a type of healing that works a lot with the angelic realms. A lot of people who do Reiki, and I am a Reiki master, will also move into this. Now, apparently it's something very common in Ireland, it's common in UK, and in apparently other parts of Europe. There's a lot of Rouhani practitioners. USA doesn't have very many. I think there's maybe 3 websites, and their people are kind of spread out. Like there's somebody in Michigan, there's somebody in North Carolina. You're saying, oh, I was feeling the same yesterday. Yeah, there was something about yesterday, wasn't it? It just seems like it was just explosive. I didn't really check what the astrological factors were yesterday, but it was kind of an explosive day. And normally Mars is actually my soul planet, so I tend to have this, I can, when provoked, because I'm also Taurus, so I tend to have a long fuse, but when provoked, I can kind of, I can get this way. But over the years, I've really tempered a lot of that, and I am usually pretty patient and pretty grounded, but then there's just days. I'm just like, really, you want to poke the hornet's nest today. Yeah, so it's, So anyway, yeah, so I'm doing this Rouhani healing today, and I'm going to see how that goes. And I was reading a little bit about it, and it's something that kind of works on the angelic realms, and I think they were talking about it's like angels of the pink ray or something like that, which literally sounds completely antithetical to me because because I'm not somebody who kind of I'm not it sounds a little too fluffy to me, but by the same token, I am working more now with the angelic realms, which I did not do before. Before that was not really an area that I worked in, but I've kind of been, as I said, a lot of my work that I'm doing, and like I said, it's with Azrael, but it's just when I get pulled into this, it's something that comes to me. It's not something I've really looked for, but I feel like, well, if I'm working in those kind of, in that kind of milieu, I guess you could say, then I wanted to go ahead. So I'm just like, okay, I'm going to have a session today and see what I think of it. And that might be a certification I want, especially if there's not a lot of people in the USA who are doing it. The method of it seems rather interesting to me. And, and there's nothing, and there's certain aspects of it that I work with. But yeah, I think a lot of people are very comforted by this is all about light, this and that. But to me, my philosophy has always been, unfortunately that over focus on light can really disenfranchise. It's what causes that disenfranchisement. It's what causes things to go into shadow, because we just say, or people who say that's a lower vibration thing, or that I don't like the whole higher vibration, lower vibration thing. To me, they're all your vibrations, and they're part of all the same thing, and they're all there for a reason. Which is why also, like yesterday when I felt like I was in a bad mood in the afternoon, I'm like, okay, I just need to be, I can't be saying to myself, no, you shouldn't be in a bad mood. No, I need to be in a bad mood because I'm in a bad mood. It means I just, well, if I had clients, then I would probably have, usually Tuesday's my day off, but if I had clients, I would have I would have had to, curb that. I mean, I can do that and say, okay, put that aside. You got to focus on the person who you're working with here. But when I would sit here in a bad mood, I'm like, nope, I'm just going to be in a bad mood because that's what you have to do. And good morning. I have more people joining. So anyway, there's this whole idea of when you kind of get into these things to kind of work through it. But I'll be interested to see with this angelic healing thing, how it works. I know I have a number of friends who have worked in some other modalities, like Sarakali healing and things like that. And this kind of reminds me of that a little bit. But I haven't been drawn to be certified in any of this. But this one seems like it will still be interesting, even though it sounds a little fluffy for me. I'm like, well, I don't want to just discount things on that basis, especially if they seem like they're something that's highly beneficial. So so I'm going to check that out and see what that's like today. And for those who've just joined, I'm doing, it's just called Rouhani healing, and I have a session at about 11 today, so I'm going to see what comes of that. It's a remote session because obviously, as much as I wish I was in the UK right now, I'm not in the UK. So, and that's where, well, actually no, this person's in Michigan, sorry. I'm taking a class that's going to be in the UK. So this is kind of where it is right now. So, okay, so all that said, the thing that came into my mind last night that I wanted to talk about this morning has a lot to do with symbolism. And I can't remember specifically why this had come up for me yesterday, because it's one of those things that came up just as I was going to sleep last night. And so I got up and wrote a note to myself. But I think the thing I wanted to talk about was the way in which symbolism is, we tend to discount symbolism. We think of something as merely symbolic. It's a token gesture. You're going through the motions of something, but it's really a meaningless thing. You're not doing the thing. If you think about like Monty Python's Life of Brian, if you've ever seen that movie, the point at which Brian gets arrested in the movie, and Judith comes in and says, something's happening, we should do something. And they're like, right, this calls for an immediate discussion. And then what they do is they write a proclamation, and it's really kind of, taking the mickey out of that, because it's just like, yeah, it's like, you're making this symbolic gesture, we'll all release doves, or we'll light this, or whatever. And it doesn't seem to mean anything. It just seems to be a lot of tokenism, really, just kind of doing something just to say, oh, look at me, or to me, the way I always felt about wearing certain pins, like, I was never big on wearing pins for like breast cancer and stuff like that, even though those are causes I support. I always feel like, well, okay, putting stickers and things, I mean, it's nice to show that people maybe have donated or something, but I don't feel the need to display all that stuff. I don't know. That's just me. I feel like it's something that I prefer to, you do it, but I don't know. I just don't feel. Sometimes I feel like people do that without actually really being invested in what they're doing. It's more like, I'm showing you that this is something I'm invested in, but then I see that people are not invested in things. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So I have. But nonetheless, that said, symbolism is something that's critically important. When you think about it, all of our speech, everything that we do is a form of symbol. Language is, the fact that I can communicate with you right now, I'm using an agreed upon symbol system that we know, which in this case happens to be the English language. And, obviously there are other languages. And language also comes in the form of art. It can come in the form of music. The reason that these forms of creativity are important is because they allow a level of communication with something deeper, not things that are just just about making money, or about the kinds of goals that we tend to have that may be around survival. I mean, it can be connected to those as well. Obviously, when you talk about pagan rituals and things like that, you're talking about old ways of doing things that were about making crops grow, or about having to do a lot of the Wheel of the Year festivals have to do with harvest, and they have to do with the way in which in encouraging fertility and encouraging things. At least in theory, that's what we think that they are. But there's a lot around that, because obviously the survival of a particular culture may have depended on that. So there was a lot of sympathetic magic and different types of things that would go on to try to ensure that those processes continued and that the community would prosper in that way. So you have symbolic acts like that, but most people in this day and age tend to feel like it's merely symbolic, like, haha, people thought that was doing something, but it really does nothing. People who still practice different forms of magic have also recognized, people in this day and age don't practice magic maybe there's people who practice it for show, but a lot of people who actually make it as part of their belief system and what they do recognize that this has results. And and the symbolism of it is something not, to be taken for granted. Now, whatever the spiritual aspect is of that, I mean, we can talk about people's different beliefs about things, and my attitude towards this has always been very, very open. I'm saying, well, yes, it could be that, and it could be something more mundane. When people tell me that it's a spiritual, I've had experiences that I would regard as spiritual, so I don't discount other people's spiritual experiences, just because people say, oh, well, in the world we live in today, we don't think that way, right? But a lot of people do, and I think people still really do, because fundamentally, I think we still want to be connected with the world around us. We don't want to be alienated from it in our own heads. But the idea of symbolism, what came to my mind was just that, okay, symbols are something that are meant to connect us to something that is, it's meant to point to something. The problem that we have when we're very, very rational and analytical is that we overfocus on the symbol. We think that the symbol is the thing. So, for example, if you have somebody who is Christian and they wear a cross around their neck, people, they place a lot of, it's like a fetishism is what they call it. You place a lot of stock in the cross itself as an object, but all the cross is doing is pointing you to something else. If you walk into a cathedral, for example, if obviously, depending on where you are, if you walk into it, it's got a magnificent stature to it. You walk inside and you see the architecture. You have the flying buttresses. You have these kinds of the way in which everything is laid out. When you have the nave, and then you have the choir, and you have all these different things that are meant. I mean, when you walk in, it fills your senses and it points. But the idea is not that all the objects in that cathedral, all the stained glass windows and all of the architecture, that's not really the point. I mean, you can look at it from an artistic standpoint and say, oh, look how beautiful this is and how this is designed. But really the whole point of all of this artwork is to point your direction, your attention to something that's beyond it. Okay, so that's what symbol is supposed to do. Now, when Protestantism came in and became a thing, they basically said, well, we don't like all of this pomp and circumstance, all these opulent, all the opulence of a church. It should be stripped down, it should be bare, it should just be scripture. And that completely misses the point, as far as I'm concerned, because it takes the mystery out of it. It doesn't point you to what it's supposed to be, to mystery it's supposed to be pointing you to. It's taken that out of it and made it all about reading the text. It over-rationalizes it. And, I mean, yes, you do have things like the Church of England or the Anglican Church that tries to kind of combine the two things. But, a lot of the things, the cult of the saints, okay? People look at the cult of the saints and they would say, like, oh, well, that's a form of idolatry. That's the other thing, too. There's a thing in religion where we talk about iconography versus idolatry. And when you take the symbol and you you fetishize the symbol and you make the symbol the thing, then that's what you would call idolatry. Iconography is when you take the symbol and the symbol has a psychological effect of pointing you to that space that is not, it activates something that's not in your conscious mind. It activates something that's in the collective, something archetypal, and it connects you to that. It allows you to connect to some kind of that deeper reality that is more numinous, that we have a hard time connecting with. That's the whole point of symbols. That's the point of rituals. And I feel like it's something that is not, in this day and age, especially in things like psychiatry and psychology, it's, in a lot of therapies, this is something that's often discounted because, again, we've gone Protestant in terms of how we do psychology now. It's all about, no, we're going to talk about the mind and what's cognitive and altering our thinking patterns and altering our brain chemistry. Like, we're only focused on that kind of either medical or rational aspect of it, as though that's all that there is to it, because evidentially that's all we can see. But clearly, when we're talking about dreams and we're talking about all this stuff, there's more to it, but we have tended to discount it. So I wanted to quickly, I know that this half an hour goes by really fast, but there's a little piece here. This is a book that I make my students read part of, called Jungian Psychiatry. When I teach my classes, and actually when I teach my classes outside of university, I have them read this piece as well. But Fears, now, as a psychiatrist, Fears was a Jungian psychiatrist, which is interesting. He did psychiatry, which meant he dealt with the medical side of mental illness and things like that. But he also was a therapist, and I read his chapter on family therapy, and I definitely would not have recommended this guy as a family therapist. However, he makes this interesting point. He talks about something called being in Medusae, or the Medusa effect. And in the way, and to him, Medusa, when we talk about Medusa as a figure who you look at her with her snakes for hair, and you look in her face and you're turned to stone, that's her thing. She's one of the Gorgons, and that's the power that she had. But the idea of being in Medusae means that somehow you are figuratively turned to stone. You are now disconnected from the ego, from the outer world, and you are caught. This would be almost what he would call kind of schizoid state, would be in Medusae, or a state of very severe clinical depression where somebody feels like they're down a hole, they're in Medusae. And what he had found was that when people were, like, they use a lot of art in that kind of therapy, and people would literally draw a figure. And it didn't matter who they were or what their knowledge of mythology, but they would draw something that looked like a little tentacled creature they would draw themselves in this space, and then they would draw this little tentacle creature, and they would say that that's the Medusa. And it's interesting because, and these were not people who were necessarily familiar with mythology. This was a really interesting story, though, and I want to share it with you because I feel like this drives home the point about the way in which symbol works with consciousness. So this was a okay. So he said, okay. So there's a okay. It says a 66-year-old woman, widowed, mother of 2 children, was booked in for clinical psychotherapy. The history was not very encouraging. The woman had been seriously ill for 21 years already. She had been in psychiatric care before on grounds of severe bewilderment, and that time, this is like the 60s, they used insulin therapy or electroshock and stuff like that, which now nobody would use, but it influenced the condition. After 12 years of treatment in one hospital, she had been transferred to another to no avail. The patient was mute most of the time, occasionally grimacing and mumbling incomprehensibly in a mixture of German and English. Whenever she had the opportunity, she escaped from the hospital and had to be brought back by the police. Often she was found sitting on her wardrobe in an attitude of refusal, and she repeatedly smeared the walls of her room. She rolled the carpet, bedclothes, and linen together and threw them in a corner. Over the years, she lost nearly all of her teeth and her hair. Okay, so we're seeing what the condition is here. So curiously, the patient's family had gotten the idea that modern psychotherapy could help. At the family's insistence, we decided to accept the patient. And so he goes on about what kind of medication they were giving her and so forth, and how things were not very encouraging at first. It says after 3 weeks, the patient had become a familiar sight. We knew her idiosyncrasies, and now and then would risk letting her eat by herself. But then she immediately began to smear the walls with jam, and that was the beginning of psychotherapy. It is a mistake to reject what the patient does as nonsense or sick. An inspection of the smeared wall revealed that the patient was evidently trying to paint a face on the wall with jam. In the presence of a nurse, I told the apparently completely distracted patient that it would perhaps be better to use paper and paint to draw with. At the same time, I instructed the nurse to see that the painting materials were provided. Evidently, the patient felt herself understood. A few days later, she had painted her first picture. And this is it. Okay? And so it shows a town plan with a central square. Around the town are airplanes waiting to take off. The plan bears the caption, part of a plan of a heavenly towns frozen a long time ago in Arctic waters. And he talks about how this was a mandala image, because you could see there was a circle. And Jung came to the conclusion that mandala is an image of an ordered or urbanized personality structure, and showed that images occur in spontaneous products of European patients. And he discussed this in front of the patient, who evidently is completely out of it. But immediately the next day, she was able to write a completely lucid letter to her family. Okay? So he says the letters were entirely normal and spoke freely about life in the clinic and nurses and doctors. We were more amazed since the patient's families, the letters sent off after decades of silence, were merely proof of the expected success of psychotherapy. So they go on, and she starts making more pictures. And so the next one she makes is of a lotus flower. Okay? And so she talks about, and she says, a child can sit on the petals. Okay? Then she has this image down here of a clock that's showing 11 o'clock. Now, this woman's in her 60s, and this was interpreted to indicate that she didn't feel she had much time left. And then one of her final images was this one. And she literally describes it as an eye, a fish. Now, this is not a woman who has any understanding of symbology, hasn't studied myth, hasn't done any of those things. But the end result of this was that after doing this, she was able to come back into the realm of language, which is the symbol system that we use to connect externally, through the pictures and through the doctor discussing the pictures and understanding trying to help her find a path back to the ego, back to being able to connect, because that's almost like a schedule. You're completely cut off from the ability to communicate rationally with the outside world. And eventually, 6 months later, this woman was released from the hospital. She had got her hair, I guess she got a wig or whatever. She got her teeth fixed, and was out of facility, was never in a facility again, and traveled the world. Now, we don't really hear a lot about that. If you hear about somebody in that kind of a state today, generally, they are on some kind of medication, which, okay, yeah, they probably need, but it ends up being a lifelong thing that has to be maintained. And I just find that this whole case to be really, really interesting, because to me, it shows the power of symbol when it comes to the mind and what can happen, because you have somebody there who is literally stuck in an archetypal space and doesn't know how to, it can only communicate that way, and to the people who don't understand it, it's a bunch of nonsense. Like, oh, we don't, that person's just, they're crazy, right? But they're not. And so I usually introduce this to my myth students as a point of saying myth and symbol, the symbols of religion, the symbols of myth, I mean, they may or may not mean anything to us in the way that they are presented. Like with religion, a lot of people are more focused on the social consequences of religion and don't think about the symbolic context of it. Well, what we call the mystery context, the mystery that it points to. They're more focused on the fact, on certain things. And understandably, you don't want to belong to an organization that, say doesn't support your rights or doesn't support this or that. You can understand that social policy being an issue. But that's not all there is to the religion. Religion is meant to tie you back. That the word religare comes from to tie back. That's the Latin word for binding back or tying back to something, and the idea is that this provides the system that connects you back to something, that mystery about the fact that we're here and we're alive and we have consciousness, and it connects you back to that. It connects you back to it in some way, but not in some kind of a literal sense. That's the problem with taking the symbol and reading it analytically, or reading it as Campbell would say, reading it as poetry instead of prose instead of poetry. You're not looking for the image there. You're not looking what the image is pointing to. You're just trying to rationalize it in terms of all other kinds of things. So the other example that I could think of with regard to symbol systems has to do with what we think of as demonic possession. So when this kind of a thing presents itself in the psychological field, in the psychiatric field, this is known as possession syndrome. And the way that it is treated is often with antipsychotic drugs. The problem is, as has been discussed, it was an article I had read about this because I thought it was fascinating, is that the psychologist who was writing about it, he said, but the antipsychotic drugs, I don't know if there's any instances where they actually work. It's classified as a psychosis, and so this is the medication that they will provide for that. But they said, the person often has to undergo some kind of religious exorcism by a formal official, and that does work. And from the perspective of psychology, it works because that is the symbol system that's required to fix that kind of problem. It's not something you can't talk somebody through it. It's not merely a chemical imbalance. Okay. I mean, not that chemical imbalances can't create some real difficult situations for people, certainly, but it's not all about that. And we tend to focus very exclusively on that. And then when this stuff comes up from the soul, when it comes up from the depths, so to speak, then nobody knows how to deal with it. It becomes a crisis. And it's kind of fine that it becomes a crisis, but then the crisis is not. It's a crisis that may need to be managed symbolically, in a way, either through a ritual or through, as we see here, through using art or something like that to pull somebody back into the realm of society, of ordered society, of trying to get back into that space where they feel that they are not only connected internally but connected externally. Because there's a danger in going too far into that underworld. That's being swallowed by the beast. That's the symbol. That's the metaphor, right? You have to watch out for that. So at the same time, you do need to. I always encourage that people should explore that space if they're ready to. But at the same time, it's not like you want to get lost or immersed in that space. So it's interesting. And I do feel that that symbol is. It's often undervalued in the 21st century, and the fact that we live in a world which, regardless of where you stand on any particular issue, clearly everybody is divided about things. Okay, there's huge divisions that exist now, and huge amounts of this very, very tribal mentality. It's like there's a real us and them-ism that really goes on, and I think part of that represents the split in the psyche, the fact that that outward-facing world is completely disconnected from the inward-facing one, and so that when something occurs, when an episode occurs like this, or when one constellates, or one falls into a depression, or one falls into, we only know how to treat one aspect of that. And oftentimes it's a matter of that person never really gets out of that state. They're just maintaining, however, through medication or whatever, to stay out of that state. And this sort of thing is not really, because again, people have, just like they've taken the mystery out of a lot of religion, and it becomes more about reading texts, then and the text becomes fetishized, in my opinion. People who say, well, we don't have any symbols. I'm like, yeah, but you fetishize the text. I mean, there's that can happen too, and people have to watch out for that. But when you're overly concerned with dissecting and analyzing something, you might miss the bigger picture there. And the symbols, even if they're not rational, because most of our consciousness is not rational. That's why I say, we all need to be rational human beings and communicate with each other and, be civilized and decent to each other. I mean, we all need to do those things, but we have to recognize that these things are there, that there's a bigger picture here. So let me get on to our reading for the day and see what comes up, if that connects in at all with the thing we've been talking about today. But I'm just going to keep this very general for everybody watching. And, all right, so... Okay, so our cards for today. Our first card is Harmony. This is the Ten of Cups card, so this is a nice start. This is about being connected. It's about being in harmony with things. It's about being connected with this world, with with the world around you. Tens in the tarot are about community. Nines tend to be more individual. So, for example, a Nine of Pentacles would be about your own personal wealth or abundance. The Ten of Pentacles would be about something connected to family or legacy or something bigger than you, right? So just like the Nine of Cups would be about your own personal satisfaction, the Ten of Cups is your satisfaction, but being harmonious with a community and not just on your own. The whole John Donne, no man is an island thing, right? You're connected. You're part of a system. You're part of a system in terms of consciousness, and you're part of a system in terms of just even your local community. Internal feeling of which we're not aware is the source. Okay, so this is the Ace of Wands card. And the source card indicates, there is, a lot of people use the word source with a capital S to represent either what we think of as the inner voice or what we think of as a sort of our inner part of our soul that provides that creativity, that provides that, whatever that is that we end up expressing and offering to people creatively. That's actually the storehouse of the symbol systems, right, is the source. And they come through and we express them in the ways that we need to, according to the way we need to live life, or maybe the way in connection with others, what we need to present to others. What in terms of what we're doing. Because even if people were not doing, let's just say they're not writing books, or they're not academics, or they're not artists, there's still something in the way that we connect with each other. Everybody has something to offer, right? And the best place to operate from is from source. So this is talking about operating from source. Now, the external feeling of which we're aware is the stress card. Okay, and we've gotten this one before. This is the Seven of Wands. So this is about the idea, I think it kind of reminds you that one connects in with source. Don't get too hung up on, the stress card is all the important things that I have to do, right? I need to keep track of this, and I need to do that, and I need to do that. And it's saying, relax. You just need to connect with source, and allow that inner voice, allow yourself to see what's going on around you, and interpret and act according to that. To have a rigid plan all the time, or to have to fill up your calendar with a lot of stuff just to kind of do it is eventually, you have the monkey that's going to pop the balloon here. That's where you can fall into that, because you're way too much in the head. And Seven of Wands as a card tends to be a very defensive card too. It tends to be a card of trying to maintain, stand your ground on something. Usually it shows a guy standing on top of a hill holding a wand or a stave, and people underneath him with staves, and it's almost like he's up there fighting them off. And that's usually the way that we're kind of addressing the external world here. But it's saying, there's this need to connect with source. Of course, being its fire energy, sometimes connecting with that also can mean that we are very, very high intensity. We were just talking at the beginning of this about the kind of rather intense energy, especially yesterday, where it was very high irritation kind of a day. But the source card would be suggesting that there is this intensity of energy. So it's almost like when you light a fire. I mean, the fire can produce good things, but it can also flame up, and when you have a lot of intense energy like that, it needs to find an expression. Otherwise, you can make yourself very stressed. You can make yourself very you can get yourself very worked up because that fire, so to speak, that's inside of you doesn't have an expression. So now what's interesting is this is actually the moon card in this deck, and it's called the past lives card. And that's fascinating to me that it's called that, because the idea there is that there are past patterns that may be affecting the present. So if you're somebody who's not a believer in past lives, then certainly we'll be talking about something potentially ancestral. As I said, I tend to think that these are more concurrent lives, maybe more than past lives. But whatever it is, it's like there's these bits of things that are unconscious to us that are having an impact on the situation that we may or may not be ready to face at any particular time. So the past lives card generally means something will come up for us at the time that we're ready for it. Okay. And our outcome here is the King of Pentacles. We have the Abundance card. Okay, he calls this the Zorba the Buddha card. This is a guy who's kind of a Buddha, and he's also immersed in this world, enjoying sensual pleasures. That's a very tantric kind of an idea, because and tantra is not all about sex. I mean, I know that's the way it's often couched in Western culture, but tantra is about integration, and that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You want to integrate material and experiences. You don't want to say, well, I'm all about light and I purge myself, or I stay away from all of these other things. No, to be harmonious, all of those things have a place. It's not like, I'm going to live an aesthetic life and I'm going to get rid of all material things, or I'm going to live an overly sensual life and completely ignore all the other things. As Alan Watts had put it, he said the spiritual person needs a beer and a burp, and he says, and the overly sensual person needs like a hard bed in the forest. It's like we need something that's going to you don't want to take certain things too seriously, because when we start overly focusing on things and taking too seriously, we all have an intensity, and I think that intensity can be that way when we are trying to do stuff, but we feel like we're blocked. If you are trying to make stuff happen in your life and you feel like you're blocked, like at every turn, or you have to wait, that can get you very frustrated. That can get you very hyped up about things, because because you're just kind of like, you want to move ahead. You're ready. You're pumped, and now you just have to stand. And so what do you do with all this energy, right? Where does it go? So I think, okay, what's kind of coming into my mind is just, this is sort of a time of, for a lot of people, when you're waiting, I think it was put once, if fishermen can't go to sea, they repair nets. So sometimes it's just a matter of laying the groundwork or preparing the ground for things, not overly stressing yourself about maybe what's not happening immediately or what's going on. There's definitely a sense here of being able to kind of be a little bit more in the moment and not just repeat a past pattern where we always feel, as I've talked about in previous live streams, you just want I have to do something all the time. If I'm not productive, I'm a bad human being. I can't take time out to enjoy myself because then I'm being lazy. And how am I going to make money? We all kind of have these things that we do, and even me saying it out loud. I mean, I may later today just do the exact same thing. I mean, it's not a judgmental thing, because it's just pointing out the fact that we all do it. And so how can we kind of slowly shift ourselves away from doing that and more into connecting with life? But the symbol systems, I think, are really, symbol has a lot more importance than I think we tend to assign to it. We tend to think of it as something that is superfluous. We think like, oh, well, that just symbolizes that doesn't mean anything. But the whole point of the symbol is that it does mean something. The symbol itself is not the thing. It's what the symbol points to. And that's the thing that you need to pay attention is what does the symbol point to? And that's not something necessarily that can be apprehended cognitively. Okay, that's why you have poetry rather than prose. You might be able to use language and things to create images, but the image, it's more about where do you feel with the image? What does that image tell you? even if it seems irrational to you or your logical analysis doesn't really, you can't figure out, if it doesn't seem to make sense in your logical analysis, it's still it's still something to be paid attention to. And as I've said, again, there's a need to, I always make notes of things like that if I think that they don't fit in with the picture that I'm seeing. And I say, okay, well, let's see if it ultimately does fit in with the picture that I'm seeing. And usually it does. So anyway, I hope this was enlightening for you this morning. I thank you guys so much for joining me, for everybody who has joined me this morning. And of course, if you missed the beginning of it, as I always say, this will be available on Instagram to watch the whole reel. And I'll be downloading it today. I have a call with somebody at 8 o'clock, but certainly this morning I will be downloading it and putting it on YouTube as well for people to watch. So, you are welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed. And for those of you who are interested, I will be here tomorrow morning. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, I think we're at, right? Have a great Wednesday, and we'll see you tomorrow.